Welcome back, everyone. This is our late medieval Proto-Renaissance Italian lecture. This is our final lecture topic. We're looking now at the artwork of the 14th century, the 1300s, and there are an enormous profusion now of artists who have gained professional standing in the guilds, who are becoming known by their own names and are being recorded in history. So let's take a look at their work. The tradition that we saw in the work of Cimabue is being continued here by the artist Duccio. Duccio is a kind of deceptive figure. He is obviously painting religious themes, but we also know from his biographical information that he was a bit of a scoundrel. He was in fact arrested and fined multiple times for a variety of different offenses against his civic duty, including refusing military service, breaking curfew, etc. So you can see that he is definitely using some of that Eastern style that we talked about, and we can see some of the shading and reverse techniques happening. But if you look at the skin tone and you start to look for highlight and shadow, you can start to see that these figures begin to feel a little bit more three-dimensional throughout Duccio's work. So by the time he is the recipient of this commission, he's really mastered his ability to do highlight and shadow. Take a look at light on the knee of Mary. You really believe there's a knee underneath that's poking toward the front of the drapery and stretching the drapery because of the gravity is pulling it downward to create folds of highlight and shadow. It starts to feel believably real. It's not that kind of medieval stylized series of lines that seem to swirl around for no reason. This is the Maesta altar. It was created for the Siena Cathedral. It is almost 7 feet in height. It's a pretty enormous piece. When it was completed, they shut the city down and carried it to the cathedral to install it in a citywide procession. So there was a celebration in the whole town just to see this piece completed and installed. It was, unfortunately, in an attempt to try to maintain some money and to provide for the continuation of the church, the painting has actually been cut down. Pieces have been sold off. The lower panels would have shown the lives of Mary and Christ, and the back panels showed the Passion of the Christ, the story of the crucifixion. So here is reconstruction view of what this altarpiece should actually look like, front and back. The left-hand side with the Madonna and Child obviously is the front. Clearly we can see hierarchy of scales still is a factor, and we see that the perspective is not perfect, the anatomy is not exactly there, but we're getting a lot closer, and here we are just at 1310. We definitely have Gothic architectural styles still kind of prevalent here in the early 1300s. We looked at the Cathedral of Orvieto in the sculpture in the last section. This is the work of Simone Martini. Martini's lines definitely have a Gothic feeling. You can see those pointed arches and kind of elaborate tracery work. There's clearly still an emphasis on this golden background of the Byzantine style, but if you really look closely at the highlight and shadow on the supporting figures on either side of the Annunciation, you can really begin to feel the roundness of the forms, and the expression of the emotion is really quite clear. This is an Annunciation scene, so the angel Gabriel is presenting to the Virgin Mary and telling her that she will be the mother of the Christ child. And you can see she's kind of pulling back in fear. There's like an actual surprise, shock, and a little bit of trepidation in her face. And you can see the words of the angel floating out of his mouth toward her. It says, translated to English, it says, "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you." When we move our attention to Florence, we can see kind of a continuation of this style of altarpiece painting, but it's beginning to change a lot when we see the work of the artist Giotto di Bondone. Giotto is an artist who really takes everything that Cimabue and the others have started and pushes it into a new territory. You can see that same kind of idea that Duccio had with the projection of the knees into the folds, but take a look across the chest of the Virgin, and you realize that there is a believable human anatomy underneath. The breasts are pushing against the blouse, and you can see the fabric responding there. Even though the architecture seems a little small for her body, and she's much larger than the supporting angels, the perspective on the throne and the steps is much more believable than the example we saw of the same type of subject by Cimabue. This is Giotto's probable most important masterpiece, the Arena Chapel in Padua. And so this was built to be near the personal palace of the patron, and he also is trying to make sure that we recognize his importance socially. This will also serve as a funeral chapel, so his family will be buried here. It's a very important space for him and his family, but also to secure his position in society. And you can see we've got that blue ceiling with gold stars that we've had in so many churches, all the way back really to the Eastern style in Ravenna that we certainly have come to expect, I think, in Italian church design. The paintings were executed by Giotto with several assistants, and we know that there were over 600 ginorate, individual working days, went into the decoration of this chapel. It's incredibly detailed. The element that I want us to focus on, or the panel I want us to focus on, is this one. You can see it in the lower register here. So we're seeing the life of Christ and the crucifixion story. So the Lamentation is the piece to know. It is really pretty remarkable in late medieval, early Renaissance painting, in that we see figures from the back. We see figures in profile, in three-quarter, expressing emotion. We see their bodies underneath the fabric. It seems very believable that the fabric is draping over their spines and limbs in a very realistic way. We also see the angels, which are appearing to mourn the body of Christ. He's just been removed from the crucifixion, and this is before he is interred in the tomb. You can see the angels are even foreshortened, as if they're bursting out of the scene toward us. For the first time, we have scenes in these paintings that appear to be not the figures facing us and acknowledging that we're looking at them, but it appears as though we're looking into windows, into three-dimensional spaces, as if those figures are not aware of us, as if we are intruding visually into their space. The Lorenzetti family of painters really were quite successful in the mid-1300s, early to mid-1300s. This is the work of Pietro Lorenzetti. It is also an altarpiece. It's the birth of the Virgin, and so here is her mother. There's Mary, and you can see that in this case he's actually created ribbed vaulted ceiling in believable perspective in this painting. In addition to giving us highlight and shadow on the drapery and the figures, we actually are starting to have very believable illusions of three-dimensional space. Giotto had achieved that in the Arena Chapel, and we certainly see Lorenzetti achieving that here. Ambrogio Lorenzetti is best known for his series of paintings to decorate essentially the town hall in Italy. So this is the public palace. This is a room in which the city elders would meet, where laws would be passed. And so the decoration scheme is effects of good government in the city and in the country, and there's a companion set of paintings on the opposite walls that show the effect of bad government. But you see that what Lorenzetti has done is almost perfect perspective. He's given us 1-point and 2-point perspective pretty believably, shows the active life of the city, and shows the good effects of a well-managed civic life. What you see at the gate here continues into this panel, and right above the gate is a figure of an angel holding a gallows, which is a device for execution, for hanging someone. And she has a banner in front of the gallows, which basically reads, "You're welcome to come to the city. We welcome you to Vienna. Obey the laws, because you'll be held to our legal system." So basically, don't mess up when you're here in Siena. Right beside her foot, you can see the Capitoline wolf. We recognize this all the way back from our look at Etruscan and early Roman. So literally we're looking at Siena presenting itself as a city-state that is the true inheritor of the Roman Empire. And that's the building that these paintings are in. You can see the government side here. There's the gate, there's the Capitoline wolf and the angel. Here's the good government on this side. And here's the bad government. And you can really tell it's bad because there are people literally dying in the streets. And the bad governor has a goat and a goat-hooved demon, and he is wearing a garment that shows his horns. So just in case you weren't sure, this is the effect of a bad government. Look at the buildings falling apart in the background. Every detail is absolutely spot on and also kind of funny. The cathedral in Florence, we've already looked at the baptistry building, but the cathedral itself is a pretty interesting story, and it is a Gothic cathedral. It definitely has some ribbed vaulting that we're accustomed to seeing. Maybe not as tall as the interior of some of the French churches that we've looked at, but the dome is certainly the most impressive aspect. That dome will finally be completed in the very early days of the Renaissance. It is the tallest masonry dome in the world to this date. It is a remarkable accomplishment of engineering, and it definitely shows the Renaissance mindset of trying to make improvements and to strive for the absolute best outcomes. In Pisa, we also have a remarkable structure beside the cathedral and baptistry and campanile that we looked at when we were talking about architecture earlier. The paintings within the Camposanto, which is essentially an indoor graveyard. The Camposanto paintings reference the Black Death, and that's really what you're seeing here in the triumph of death. So there are people interred below the floor, the walls. There are collections of funeral statuary dating all the way back to the Imperial Roman period, and then the walls would have been richly frescoed, but a lot of those were damaged during the Second World War. But you can see here a reference to the plague. We definitely want to take a look at the work of Messagio. This will truly transition us from the 1300s to the 1400s. Messagio is the inheritor of all of the perspective and anatomy lessons that we've seen up to this point, and his paintings really do start the Renaissance in terms of painting and making accurate proportions and believable illusions of three-dimensional space. You see on the left his painting of the Holy Trinity, which includes the donors who paid the money. They commissioned the painting to be done. And you can see the illusion of space is really perfect here in this barrel vault that recedes behind the vision of Christ on the cross. We also see God the Father and the Holy Spirit in one. You can see the Ginorata line here along the edge of the figure of Adam and Mary in this painting from the Brancacci Chapel. There you see them to the side. Messagio's tribute money is a great example of what really the Middle Ages produces in, or rather what the Renaissance inherits from the Middle Ages is this rich ability for storytelling, but now combined not only with the symbolism, but with believable anatomy, three-dimensional illusion of space through linear perspective, and also atmospheric perspective. The atmospheric perspective tricks that we're seeing here, we really haven't seen since the gardenscape in the Villa of Livia all the way back in the Roman Republic era. So really when you look at the scene here, you are seeing a culmination of almost all of the lessons that we've had up to this point, little bits of the style in terms of the clothing that the figures wear, the poses that they have, that comes to us from the Middle Ages, but a lot of this spatial illusion and anatomical illusion is coming to us truly from the classical world of Greece and Rome. So it's all coming back, and that's what the Renaissance is all about. This story is about the disciples being asked to pay their taxes. Of course, they've given all their money to the poor, so Christ says to the apostles go fishing, and they don't see how that's really going to help them. But of course, when Peter opens the mouth of the fish that he catches, he finds the gold that they need to pay the taxpayer. We actually see Peter 3 times. He's here fishing, he's here in the middle being told to go fishing, and he's here at the end paying the Roman tax collector. So you can kind of see how all 3 beginning, middle, and end of the story are told all at once in one panel. We've already looked at tempera as the main paint type, and we want to think about how tempera paint is used in the true fresco technique. We've talked about guilds, and so this is an example of an early sculptural commission from a guild for a public space in Florence for the Or San Michele, which is an open arcaded market where people would come every week to do business. The open arcade has been bricked in recent years. However, the niches of sculpture were donated by guilds of different types throughout the city, and this is the offering that was given from the Sculptors Guild. So you see at the bottom, sculptors doing their craft. They're actually carving and casting, making work here. And the sculptures in the niche above represent artists who were Christians who refused to make sculptures of the pagan gods for the Romans, and they were executed by Diocletian. That's the Or San Michele now. You can see where the arcade has been bricked in. The Florence Baptistry we looked at earlier, talking about it in terms of the architecture of the Middle Ages. Here is the artwork that goes with it from 1340, the cast bronze doors in quattreleaf panel frame device by Andrea Pisano, and this tells us a number of stories leading up to the birth of Christ, and then the stories that follow after this. So we see that Pisano has a pretty rigid format. He has to keep all of these panels within this quatrefoil framing device. So these are the main entrance doors to the Florence Baptistry, and as we approach the year 1400, the city elders will decide that they want to commission new doors. So these doors will be moved to one of the side entrances. There's side entrances on north and south ends. The doors that are the new replacements will themselves be replaced a couple decades later. And so we want to take a look at those 2 replacements. I want you to know the one from the Middle Ages, the Proto-Renaissance, Andrea Pisano's first set of doors. You can recognize them by the quatrefoil format. Probably the most famous example is the Baptism of Christ by John the Baptist. But then there's a competition held in 1401 for the replacement of those doors with something new. And the artists who competed for this, literally they held a competition, and the artists were asked to all produce the same work. They had to create cast sculpture and relief that depicted the sacrifice of Isaac. Abraham is told by God to sacrifice his eldest son. And it's a crisis of faith because Abraham, of course, doesn't want to kill his son, but he has to obey God. So he takes his son up the mountain to an altar and is about to sacrifice him when the angel of the Lord appears and says, "You've passed the test of faith. Don't sacrifice Isaac, sacrifice this goat or lamb instead." And this is one of the great parables of the test of faith. So these are the 2 finalists. These were the 2 top possibilities. And it's interesting to see how different they are in some ways, even though they had to tell the same story and include the same elements. The angel has to be there, Abraham and Isaac have to be there, the altar and the replacement animal, as well as a donkey and 2 servants. So this has to show the landscape, it has to show the setting, it has to tell the story. The image on the right is by an artist named Brunelleschi, and Brunelleschi shows you a lot of dynamic movement as the knife is about to plunge into Isaac's throat. The angel has already stopped his arm, though, to prevent him from killing his son. I have to admit, I think it's kind of odd that the servants are here, like, they appear to be almost tying their sandals or something. They're not really paying attention, and yet they're right in the same space with these figures. It's also divided horizontally in half, which kind of limits the amount of space the artist has to work. In Ghiberti's version on the left, the division is vertical, which allows for much higher height for the figure of Abraham. We can certainly see more of the contrasto, even though he's on his knees, in the pose of Isaac here. And the best part to me is that the angel seems to be bursting out of the background, foreshortened as he comes toward us, and we don't know whether he'll make it. It increases the drama because we don't have him in contact with Abraham yet. Also, very cleverly, the servants and donkey, the less important figures, are all behind this outcrop of rock, so they're just kind of hidden from the scene. So you can imagine that the person who won was Ghiberti, and so Ghiberti wins the commission to create the new set of doors. And Brunelleschi, in true Renaissance style, decides that he will never make sculpture again. Don't feel too bad, though, because the new doors that Ghiberti is tasked with making will be dwarfed in size by this dome. It's Brunelleschi, in fact, who completes the Renaissance dome of the Cathedral of Florence. The true name of that cathedral is Mary of the Flowers, but no one calls it that. Everyone calls it Il Duomo, the dome, because it's the most impressive dome structure since ancient times. There's Pisano's set of doors. There's the 1401 replacements by Ghiberti, and then he's brought back 2 decades later in 1424 to create this set of doors, and he's freed from the restrictions of the quatrefoil. He creates fully believable illusions of perspective in low relief, in cast bronze, in these enormous rectangular panels. They are so beautiful that Michelangelo himself said they were worthy to be the doors or gates of heaven. So we call them the gates of paradise in his honor. So that brings us all the way from prehistoric cave painting to the birth of the Renaissance.